Hello, I'm Richard Smith, and I'm here to talk about my lovely wife, Heather, who lost her life to secondary breast cancer at the age of 47, exactly 11 years ago today.
Welcome to The Silent Why, a podcast on a mission to find 101 different types of loss and to hear from those who've experienced them. I'm Claire.
I'm Chris, and in this episode we're talking about a profound and deeply personal loss, and what it means to lose a partner who was also the mother of 3 young children. Are you surprised that we're actually into the 60s in our 101 list before exploring the loss of a wife?
I am. In fact, I'm quite proud of us for getting to loss 64 and still having some of the more obvious, in inverted commas, losses to cover. Such is the breadth and depth of the losses that we've found so far. And in this episode, we're speaking with Richard Smith about the death of his wife, Heather, who died from breast cancer in June 2014, when their children were just 15, 14 and 11 years old.
And as it happened, the day we recorded this conversation was the exact anniversary of Heather's death, which makes us all the more grateful to Richard for choosing to share his story with us on such a poignant day.
Over the course of our conversation, Richard reflects on the 11 years since Heather's death, the challenges and benefits of solo parenting through grief, and how having children who are also grieving can impact your own healing journey.
What stood out most to us in this chat is Richard's perspective on grief, that while he acknowledges grief brings sadness, he doesn't see grief itself as something sad, but something meaningful, a reminder to live more fully.
It's not easy. I cry all the time. I'm sad all the time. But grief isn't sad because it reminds you to make the most of today. But I miss her all the time.
Richard also shares the beautiful ways that he keeps Heather present in his life. Moments where her memory is so vivid, it's almost like she's still there.
Sometimes now, if I put the right music on and I envisage this scene and I reach out over that table, I can almost touch Heather's hand and everything's okay. So she's very present.
Reflecting on the last decade since his loss, Richard now sees grief as something as natural as breathing. Sure, it's inevitable, but he truly believes we can choose how we respond to it.
I don't think grief is a sad word. I don't think grieving is sad. I think it's necessary. Obviously, we all lose something or someone, and maybe many things and many someones. Of course we do, because we all experience life, and that's what your podcast is all about, right? But those losses remind us that we're not in control. And that lack of control over the future, I think, can worry us and can make us anxious. But I saw a quote from Khalil Gibran. He said, "Our anxiety does not come from thinking about the future, but from wanting to control it." And I think life's just a random, chaotic mess. And when we realise that and relax into that lack of control, then we can be much more positive about whatever happens to us or doesn't happen to us.
So, how did Richard get to the point of not seeing grief as a sad word? Let's find out. If you've listened before, you'll know exactly how we start our conversations, and we did the same thing in this episode. We asked Richard to introduce himself.
I'm Richard Smith. I'm in Wokingham in Berkshire. I'm here to talk about my lovely wife, Heather, who lost her life to secondary breast cancer exactly 11 years ago today.
So on a day like today, Richard, let's just dive straight into it. It's marked as an anniversary. Quite often in society, an anniversary will be preceded by the word happy. Do you use the word anniversary in a family context of saying it is the anniversary? Is there a greeting? Or, how do you say, anniversary?
Well, our family calendar on the fridge door says the word death-aversary. Is that a word? I don't know. I don't know whether the kids have created that. But sort of, she's dead every day. So it's the anniversaries have never been a big point for us. We feel her absence all the time. So it's just another day, really.
Well, thank you on the anniversary for giving us some time. What do you do as a family on the anniversary? Because I think today, whether it's an annual thing, do you have sort of like a ritual? We all go out for a bit of food or we get together? What's the plan?
So I think sort of how someone dies is really important, isn't it? And listening to some of your former guests, there's all sorts of different circumstances, aren't there? We were very lucky in that Heather was at home and she declined in the last sort of 3 weeks. But for those 3 weeks in June 2014, we didn't really go out the house. Community nurses, health visiting and doctors and various other support. She had a hospital bed delivered downstairs, but it was all very in the house, and so many family and friends were visiting, and maybe we'll come on to talk about this. It's a very powerful raw time. But anyway, because of that, on the morning, she died early in the morning on the 25th of June, we thought, we can actually go out. And the kids were teens at the time, they were 15, 14, 11. So we went into Wokingham and all went for a Nando's. The thing I hadn't anticipated, though, walking in the door, asking for a table of 4. And that was the first time it hit me that we were now, very, very real terms, not a family of 5. And 4 feels way more than 20% less than 5. So we've tried to, if we can, obviously they're in their 20s now, so it's a bit different. People are scattered over, but if we can. So, for example, after this recording, we're going to nip into Wokingham and have a Nando's.
Give us a little bit of a potted history then of sort of when you met Heather, what happened, and then sort of what happened leading up to her death.
So Heather Wood, she was, before she was Heather Smith. And I, like many, many other school and college leavers in the central Berkshire area in the 1980s and 1990s, worked in pensions administration at the Prudential or the Pru in their central Reading offices. And many, many people found their life partners there. I think there were 7,000 people working for the Pru in Reading at its peak. So we got together in 95, got married in 1996, and were blessed with 3 children all around the turn of the millennium. Catherine, born in 1998, Felicity, born in 2000, and Adam, born in 2002. I feel I should just pause that. I feel awkward talking to you two because this whole podcast is about, you two not having children, and yet I'm talking about my children. But then I did listen to your recent episode celebrating your 20th anniversary, and we only had 18 years. So, you beat us there. But it's not a competition.
It's not a competition.
No,
please don't feel awkward about that. We love to hear about other people's families. So, yeah, don't worry about that at all.
So the kids are all in their mid-20s now today. But shortly after Adam's first birthday in 2004, Heather was diagnosed with breast cancer. We were both 36 at the time, and the kids were 5, 4, and 1. She did really well. She had chemotherapy for just over 10 years. So there are lots of family stories how the kids would go with her into the Royal Berkshire Hospital, the Berkshire Cancer Centre there in Reading, and play games, while she was having chemotherapy, all in their formative years. And we're all so grateful that she was around for their formative, primary school years. But then in 2014, the cancer metastasized to several places in her skeleton. And then she declined. I think this is quite typical. Once it moves into your bones, she declined quite quickly in the final few months, dying shortly after her 47th birthday in June 2014. As I said, exactly 11 years ago today from the day we're recording this podcast. When she died, Catherine, Felicity and Adam were 15, 14 and 11, and I was 46.
So tell us what it was like in those early days. You just said about going into a restaurant and it hitting you that you weren't a family of 5 anymore. What does it feel like to be in that situation?
Well, there's quite a lot to say about it, and I've reflected on a lot. And this, I think, is why it's quite interesting, that this isn't a recent loss, because you do sort of think about it differently over the years, and then you reflect on how you thought about it before as well, if you see what I mean. Part of the thing about, I think, the two of us is we were sort of quite interested in looking out and seeing others. So one thing is there were lots of different losses. Lots of people lost something. So Heather lost her life, but her mum lost her daughter, and her brothers lost a sister, and her kids lost their mum, and her many friends lost someone who was really fun to be around. And the list goes on. And of course, I lost my wife. So when someone dies, it's one loss for sure, but it's also many different losses all at the same time. And it's quite a confusing, multifaceted thing. So I suppose I reflected less on what it meant for me, and maybe sort of what does it mean for Heather? Because I suppose those of us who are still here can talk about how we feel, but one person who can't is Heather, because she lost her life. So I've reflected on that quite a bit, maybe as a distraction from how I felt myself. I don't know. And I've thought about, what does losing your life mean? Because all of our lives are going to end, aren't they? That's certain, like death and taxes, it's certain. But what we don't know is when. It's like the ultimate unknown. But we do have this sort of expectation, don't we, of roughly how long it might be. I think we call it life expectancy. And, because of my field, if you go onto the website of the Office of National Statistics, or ONS, they have a life expectancy calculator based on your current age and sex. So for me, for example, as a 57-year-old male, I have a 50% chance of living to 84, but I also have a 10% chance of living to 97 and a 3% chance of living to 100. So what should we reasonably expect. It's a really tough thing. One thing I've started to do is think about life in days. I don't know whether it's to do with Heather going, I'm not sure. If you live to 82, then you'll have been on the planet for 30,000 days. There's a book called 4,000 Weeks by Oliver Berkman. It's about how to, make the most of your life. So if a week has got 7 days, obviously 4,000 weeks is 28,000 days. But I think life expectancy is a bit longer. So it's about 30,000 on average. But of course, you might get more. My dad lived to 94. I just looked up the oldest person alive on the planet right now. She's in the UK. She's Ethel Caterham. She lives in Surrey. She was born in 1909, so she's turning 116 this August. And she's been alive today for 42,312 days. So obviously that's an exception at the other. But Heather didn't obviously get anywhere near 30,000, that reasonable expectation. She was alive for 17,241. So a bit over half of that 30,000 expectation. So I've reflected a lot on what is a day, what do any of us do with our days? And it's quite an interesting thing when you think about it in that way. And it comes onto something I'll probably mention, which is about the now and making the most of now.
Clearly, as you say, you've reflected a lot, and that comes across in all your consideration for different aspects, different elements, and that will have included you as a husband as well as you as a dad, because you've probably reflected a lot on behalf of your 3 children as well, and what they will have sort of come through and felt and experienced and all that sort of thing. It's a question that's a bit out of the chronological order, but to have spent more than 10 years of Heather's life with cancer as part of your story, a part of your family story, did that set you up for sort of hope that maybe this will go away, or maybe it will always be the case? And then suddenly, as you said, it metastasized, got serious, and then the end came. Yeah, what was it like living for so long and for the children to have that as part of the family story?
That's a great question, Chris. In fact, I was just saying to Catherine, the oldest one, just now before preparing for this, Heather's oncologist, Dr. Clive Charlton at Berkshire Cancer Centre, he said several years into it, he said, I think you two have come to think you're invincible, because there's so many treatments, and she was young and she was healthy and she did respond well. So it was just part of family life. And as I said, the kids went into the hospital when she was having treatment. So it was no big deal. In fact, I think the reason I discovered your podcast, you had a Sue Ryder, Assistant Director of Bereavement Guests, Bianca Newman, was it, I think? And I heard that, and because I'm connected with Sue Ryder, because Heather was in hospital for a bit, they asked me to write a blog about how we spoke to the kids when we knew that it was terminal, near the end in 2014. And as part of that blog, I said, cancer, it was like no big deal. It's like it's always been there. So Heather was occasionally in hospital for various complications. And Adam, our youngest, I don't know, at 7, 8, 9, he'd say, you go down here and up, down that, around there, and the hospital. I say, Adam, how do you know your way around? He said, because I've been coming here all my life. I've been here since a 1-year-old in the pushchair. Do you see what I mean? Mm. So it was no big fear, really. It's just, got to have some new chemo. And I think that's maybe one thing I would reflect on differently, or try and think differently, is cherish the moment more, because you don't know what's going to happen. Of course, the oncologists, the clinicians, they do know that things can change. But I think we might have thought, Heather can live with this indefinitely, but that obviously didn't prove to be the case. But we did have 10 years, those 10 years from when they were 5, 4 and 1 to 15, 14 and 11. And I say to everybody, thank you for paying your taxes, because those cancer drugs aren't cheap, and they gave her the 10 years. And to be honest, I inherited 3 fully formed young people, because they'd been around her, and she was a, fantastic mum, and spent those years, being a mum to them. So that was great. Thinking about how they have been, Chris, sort of the other part of the question, it's really hard. I said there's lots of different losses going on. I don't know what it's like to be an 11-year-old losing your mum, and I was 50 when I lost my mum, in her 80s. So it's very hard to know that. And I, in a way, I hope they find podcasts run by, Gen Zs like them. Do you know what I mean? Like I'm talking to you, who can perhaps, relate more. I think it's partly just been my job to be there to feed them and clothe them and respond. But I've been a little bit reticent about trying to push any particular solutions onto them. One thing I put in that Sue Ryder blog as well is, I think 10 years on, they've all recognized more what they've lost. And now they see their 20-something friends having adult relationships with their mums, like going for a wine with their mum sort of thing. And I think you realize more what's lost. And this is this thing about, I think others of your guests are saying the grief is always there. It's like it's going to continue being there, and it'll continue to be there in different ways. But my thesis is it's a good thing, and I'll stop now, but I want to come on to I think it's a good thing.
In terms of the blog that you've mentioned there, why did you feel like you had something to say and to share about telling the children that their mum was dying?
So I think Sue Ryder reached out to me. I can't remember what the connection was that led to that. They publish a lot of bereavement material or sort of grief-related material on their website to sort of help people who are going through these circumstances. So not just about hospice care, but about grief and bereavement more generally. And they find, or they've told me they find, that real stories have much more impact than sort of a sort of dry, generic, here's some best tips. That's useful, but what someone actually did has more sort of impact. So I think one key thing is that it wasn't too raw. I mean, partly I'm doing this now, 11 years after, because I'm not sure I'd have been able to talk like this 1 year after Heather died. Do you know what I mean? Or even 2 or 3. But I think, a significant number of years can help you just be a bit more relaxed and calm about it. So maybe one of the points was it was some years ago, and I mentioned this point about how they've all developed, and I think that was the hopeful point, in that we're all fine, we're all still here, despite it being probably the rawest day. I think I mentioned in there. So this is going back. Catherine went to see McBusted. What is that? A combination of Busted and McFly, I think, at the O2 with friends, and then stay there with friends.
Don't pretend you don't know. Come on.
and then Felicity was staying with friends as well. So we told Adam on his own, and we were watching Mamma Mia on the DVD on a laptop. Remember those? Upstairs, because Heather was in bed. Because 11 is quite young, isn't it? So we told him. And then the next morning, the girls came back from their sleepovers and their concert. They're all buzzing about everything. And then I had to bring the mood crashing down to say, your mum's been having more treatments, and that doesn't look like it's working this time. And in fact, it looks likely she's going to probably die, and it could be quite soon. But the hopeful point from that is they've said to me years later, well, Dad, we didn't really know what was going on. Mummy is dying. What is that? That didn't really mean anything, because remember, the word cancer had been around forever. Do you know what I mean? So I think it was more the benefit of years of reflection can make things seem less raw, because that's a pretty raw thing.
So if we'd have, you said that, going back, you might not have been able to do this maybe year 1, year 2, year 3. If we met you year 1, what did that look like? What did you and the children look like sort of for the first year of this?
Well, I was just on autopilot, feeding and clothing them and getting them to school. I think we were a very collaborative couple. I think a lot of couples are, I think you two, you bring different things to your relationship, and you do what you do as a couple. And then if you are fortunate enough to have children, we were quite yin and yang, two parts coming together. So I think, and maybe this is true, I mean, every loss is different. It's not for me to say for others, but I think one thing is, if you do lose your spouse or life partner relatively young in life, what you lose is like your teammate, or like your pal, or the person you face the world with. Oh, you meet someone, you fancy them. The look of you doesn't make them physically sick, as Tom says in 4 Weddings and a Funeral, and you think, oh, should we have some children? Okay, let's give it a go. It's a project, isn't it? It's a thing, and you're very blessed to do that. I almost got upset there. I might get upset, but it's doable because you're a team, right? And then for the listeners, I'm doing a sort of yin and yang sign with my hands. If you take one part away, you see everything that you're not. Do you know what I mean? Mm. I think one thing, again, on your 20th anniversary episode, you talked about one of the things, fabulous friendship. Mm. Yeah, that is what's lost. But again, on the upside, as I said before, I was gifted these 3 young people who were perfectly well formed. Had she died quite quickly, in 2004 when they were 5, 4 and 1, this would have been an utterly different story, and they would have been completely different people because they would have been reared by me. Are you with me?
Yeah.
But they were already teens, or Ada was nearly a teen. So I think possibly I spent a bit too much energy focusing on myself and not on them. I don't know. But as I say, I don't know what I could do because I wasn't them.
What makes you think that?
She said near the end, "Oh, like, promise me you look after them." And I, of course, yeah, of course. But the one sort of bit of burden or weight, I mean, I'm very lucky. I'm fine. We're all healthy and, haven't got money worries and everything. But the one burden I do sort of feel is, have I done right by her with them? And I don't know how you judge that, because there's only one person on the planet, or she's not on the planet, that I could chew this over with. And she's not here, because that is the thing. I mean, this is what a relationship is. It's someone to chew something over with, isn't it? And, you can talk with family and friends, but they're not Catherine and Felicity and Adam's mum, and they're not my wife. And that's the thing. So it's a bit of a gap that I can't chew over with anybody, how it's gone. That would be nice. I sometimes dream that she's allowed to come back for a day and I can chew this over. And she can say, yeah, it's all right.
Do you think you'd have been able to verbalise back then if someone had said to you, tell me how you're feeling? And you could sort of honestly say, let's say you could say it. Would you have been able to verbalise what you were going through, or was it just like you were just surviving?
Yes, I think probably more that, Claire. All of what you're hearing now is 10 years on and my reflection on it. Perhaps I should have wouldn't have kept a journal at the time. It just would have been not nice. And I think I was just sort of surviving. I was really lucky. I say to everybody, just get life assurance, because there was a lump of money, so I didn't have to go to crazy work. This is the thing. If I'd had to go and continue doing work, so that I had a pause in work where I learned to be a single dad, and then we did some work on the house and stuff. In fact, that was the mandate. Heather, we'd always had a plan to do stuff with the house, and she wrote a list that I found of do something with the French doors and et cetera, et cetera. And that was my mandate, because there was some money. I could actually do it. Do you know what I mean? So I was so lucky that I could do that. And then I learned a little bit about what being a dad was. And I don't know, I'm generalizing, but I think a lot of dads, I would say, don't really know what is going on in their households, because generally, I'm afraid it is still like this. The mum is sort of running it all. The great opportunity I've had is the exposure to what being a mum is and being in charge of all of that. So that's been fun. And I've inherited a lot of Heather's mum friends, so her network of other mums at school. And I'm just like hugely in awe of like mums who are running households, because obviously generalizing, but typically, particularly when kids are small, dads are going off to work and aren't seeing the chaos, which is family life.
And keeping on the topic of gender, what has been your experience generally of being a man through this, with other male friends? All the manly sort of emotions, feelings. Some men don't talk about feelings. Some are more open to it now. But what's been your experience of being a man? So
I've just heard your very latest Let's Chat episode, Claire, with David Kelly, who, hospice worker who has, personal experience of loss, but works in that space as well. And he was saying something that really resonated with me, is that generally in groups that talk about this stuff, generally they're the majority female. And I think he talked about this model between intuitive or instrumental grief. And again, in general terms, girls are down the one end of, well, how do I feel about this? Can I talk with other people? Generally another group of females. Men are more, well, what can I do? How can I fix this? What can I do to make this better? And I think that's been my experience, is that support or sort of awareness or the ability to articulate feelings, and just relax into that has generally been more prevalent amongst females. Also, two other famous widowers, Robert Peston on the TV news, was BBC's ITV News, and Julian Barnes, the author. They did a couple of Radio 4 programmes. He said on that to Robert, just the two of them chatting, his male friends had been universally unhelpful, and in fact, they sort of even denied his late wife's existence, whereas female friends would, of course, talk about it. Do you know what I mean? But I think that's okay. That's just how it is. Sue Ryder said to me, they said, Richard, you're a bit unusual. You're a man who talks about his feelings. Uh, but maybe it's a spectrum. Maybe we are all on this spectrum, and some girls are more down one end and some boys are more down the other. It's not binary, I don't think. But personally, I am more of a talker, as you can already tell, and I find that chewing stuff over, either in my own head or with other folk like you, is really helpful.
So have you come to form responses to questions that sort of come sideways in a sense, whether it's at gatherings, social functions, people you've not met before, and they say things like, "Oh, are you married?" or "Is your wife here?" All the sort of assumptions. Are you quite content with where you are now when that happens, or are you still learning how to respond?
That's another great question. So it's almost meet someone new, shake their hand. Hello, I'm Richard. I'm a widower. It's because if you don't get it out soon and then you chat quite normally, either of an evening or even, over days and days that, you meet someone again, it can become awkward that you didn't mention it. And my kids have found this as well. Now they're in work situations. You have to take a stance about, well, you don't really want to share that when you first meet someone, but it's quite helpful too. But I find bringing some humour and comedy to it, talking about the dead wife. That's for us. That's easy. Sometimes that's a bit unsettling for others. It's tricky. It's a real paradox. But the other side for me, and this is coming onto the positive thing, you see, I don't necessarily see it completely as a loss because she's still very present. And the reason I can talk about this today, now at 11 years, is because she's very present. I can almost reach out to her. So I was thinking of what scenario I might sort of try and depict that with. So a favorite thing of ours would be like maybe a long train journey, maybe like on the North Line. I don't know if you know it, from Inverness up to Thurso, right at the top of Scotland, where Heather was born, actually. And maybe it's on a weekend and we've got a coffee and the Saturday papers and we're at a table seat and Heather's backwards and I'm forwards. It's always that way round. And then we've got a Walkman because it's the 90s, and we've got a splitter, that you can plug in, you can listen to the same tracks together. Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Sometimes now, if I put the right music on and I envisage this scene and I reach out over that train table, I can almost touch Heather's hand and everything's okay. So she's very present. So it's quite an interesting thing to talk about this with folk, to say, well, yeah, she died, but actually that's not the end of the world. Do you see what I mean? It's a paradox. And as we've already said, some folk are maybe less comfortable, receiving those sorts of messages than others. It's hard.
So where's that come from? Has that been a conscious thing that you've decided to do to keep her present? Or have you found that she's just naturally become that? Or did you see someone else talking about doing that? Because that's not something I've heard a lot of people talk about before.
So you did an excellent blog 3 years ago, Claire. I loved it. Disappointed with Life, all about expectation. And you said in that, I think, about we have responsibility to sort of like help, but offer hope and don't hold people in their grief and don't keep people in their grief. But I think my view is slightly different on that. My view isn't that hope follows along after grief. It's actually there alongside grief and forever. So for me, I don't think this is possible, but I'd even like to change the dictionary. I don't think grief is a sad word. I don't think grieving is sad. I think it's necessary. Obviously, we all lose something or someone, and maybe many things and many someones. Of course we do, because we all experience life. And that's what your podcast is all about, right? But those losses remind us that we're not in control. And that lack of control over the future, I think, can worry us and can make us anxious. But I saw a quote from the Lebanese American writer and poet, Khalil Gibran. He said, our anxiety does not come from thinking about the future, but from wanting to control it. And I think life's just a random, chaotic mess. And when we realize that and relax into that lack of control, then we can be much more positive about whatever happens to us or doesn't happen to us.
Yeah, that's a great way of seeing it. Do you think, or can you imagine in any way how your grief would have been different if you had been on your own and you didn't have the children with you? Would you think you'd have come out with the same sort of thoughts about it, or would that have looked quite different?
That's a really good question. I think I'm so positive about Heather now because she's in the kids. I don't know, nature and nurture. It's hard to say, isn't it? But I see a lot of her in them. And that's another reason why she's really, really present, because she's in the house all the time. I do worry a little bit, though. I try not to use the words move on, going through as if it's a place you've got to get to. I do worry a little bit that am I not living my proper life now? But, I think you may have heard previous guests say, oh, he was the love of my life. She was the love of my life. I think Heather was a pretty special person. So the 18 years that we were married, that's going to be enough for me. And, there's upsides, we never argue, she never shouts at me. So it's okay. But I think without the kids, maybe it would have been quite different. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think when someone dies, especially when it's a mother and it's young, it's almost like the grief is seen as so much worse, which it is, because obviously there is more loss. Like you said, someone has lost their mother young, which is something no one ever wants to go through. But in talking to all our guests, those that have had children seem to have had things about looking after children or about having children that's actually helped them in their grief, which is not what you'd expect necessarily. And those without that, I think, have struggled to get out of it a little bit more. Massive generalisation. That won't be true for everyone. But it does seem to be a little bit of a theme. So it interests me how much children can help someone in their grief. I'm not saying it's necessarily how the children cope with their grief, but as the individual adult, that it seems to have this driving force that you have to get on with life. You have to do things for the children a little bit. But to be able to see the person you've lost in and through the children is another lovely way of keeping them alive, I guess.
And Claire, I think it's as well as that. If you're a thoughtful person, that it's a continual opportunity to reflect. I said about you see what you're not, because you were a collaborative, coherent couple together, but then you see everything you're not. So if I just say sort of what was Heather, after she died, I found her school reports, which I'd never seen when she was alive, and in the last one at the end of her sixth form, which was exactly 40 years ago this summer, so summer 1985. The headmaster, I've written it down here, the headmaster's comment was, her charm of manner and gaiety are outstanding, and it is these three qualities that will serve her well in the future. And that was spot on. And at her funeral, I talked about three words, which sort of tried to depict how I felt she was and how she lived her life. And they were commitment, compassion, and comedy. So if she did something, she did it wholeheartedly, and she did it with love, and always with a smile and a laugh. God, I really, really miss her laugh. But I get to think, could I be those things, or maybe I'm not those things, and that's okay, because, we were a good couple because I didn't have those same things. I was the serious one. So I think there's lots of opportunity to reflect and enjoy and remember the person more, because you're doing what they were doing, but in a different way, because you're you and they were them.
There's a phrase that keeps coming to mind when you're talking, and it's a phrase that some people have a real issue with, I think. But I think in some ways it must be true. But I keep thinking about the fact that time heals, and some people really don't like that kind of concept. But looking at you, I feel like it could be, I don't know, it could be said of you, but I'm interested to know, has time healed, or is this something that you've specifically kind of cultivated as you've gone forward?
Well, we had some email exchange, didn't we, Claire, before this, about keeping the grief alive, because I heard one of your previous guests say that, and I thought, yes, that for me crystallizes it. It was Caroline Fowler, I think, whose father had an aortic dissection, but she does work now in that space, working with a clinician, I think. And she said she recognizes that's keeping the grief alive. But for me, as I think I've said, I think that is actually necessary, because it continually reminds us of this lack of control. Life is uncertain. So it's a paradox. But I think this concept of grief is powerful. It's positive, and I think I'll probably only stop grieving when I stop breathing, and that's exactly as it should be. And why do I say that? Because when you truly get, and you're continually reminded that we're not in control of the future, it makes two things crystal clear. One, for that future, we can and should be hopeful, because good things can happen, but without expectation that they will, because there's no certainty of the future. But two, for today, we should really cherish today and make the most of the only thing which is certain, which is right now. I've even heard it said that tomorrow doesn't exist, because when we get there, it'll just be another now. So I'm quite happy to continue thinking about Heather and imagine the train on the Scottish Highlands, or whatever, hundreds of different circumstances. Because for me, it's a continual reminder that we don't know what's around the corner, and we almost sort of have to make the most of now because of that. And for me, I think it's hard because it's full of paradoxes. So there's this confusion or we get messed up in our heads between the past and the present and the future, because our past experiences and our unrealized expectations, which were probably unrealistic anyway, they may not have been realized. And of course, that shapes our thoughts about the future. But the only agency we have to do anything about any of it is right now. It's impossible to act at any other time apart from right now. But it's easy to forget that. And for me, the continual reminder of this truth is through remembering Heather and remembering that she only had 17,241 days.
In your previous answer, when you were talking about the three comms, remind me, was it commitment, compassion,
compassion, and comedy? Yeah.
And then you said, that's not me. That made me think, I want to ask you what it's been like, sort of finding the right balance of having to pick up new duties, maybe as a dad and for the family, that Heather's not around to do. So you're now doing things that Heather isn't here to do, but also having to remain your own character, person. You can't be the committed, compassionate, comedic one. Was it hard to remember that and not try and be the character of Heather for the kids, but to actually just to remain yourself, even though you were doing more maybe jobs, duties that you shared before? Does that make sense?
Yes, it does entirely, Chris. So yeah, it's really tough. You're not that person, and you can't be, and it's really upsetting that you haven't got all the attributes that they had. But again, the upside of that is you can enjoy and relish that they did have those attributes. But I've got a sort of sense that leopards don't change their spots. I don't think you can really become something that you're not. It's not really sort of authentic. And I think there's lots of opportunity for humour here, and we can joke. And we have a family sort of little joke in the family that the wrong parent died, obviously, because she. But it's and you have to have a lot of humour about it because she was the fun one. But yeah, you can't be something you're not. But you can move towards it or become aware of it. As I say, a lot of dads haven't had this exposure to what all of that is. And I think that's been a great opportunity for me to learn more about. And I think I'm probably a more empathetic and compassionate person because I've been exposed to that.
We ask all our guests this because it's different for everybody. But have you ever battled with that question, why? Have you asked yourself, why have I had to go through this? Why has my children's mother died? Those sorts of questions.
Well, no, not really, because I think life is just a random, chaotic mess. So because we're not in control, therefore cherish the moment. So it's almost like why not? Something's going to happen to all of us, isn't it? It's happened to you. It's happened to all of your guests. Every single person living is going to experience life. So it's about relaxing into that lack of control, which maybe I'm just thinking now, maybe that's not a very typically masculine thing. Because you, as a man, maybe you want to intervene, at work, maybe as a manager, you're paid to take some action, to do something. Whereas actually, I think what I'm sort of maybe reflecting back is it's okay. It's just stuff's going to happen, and be chilled about that.
That's a difficult thing to learn. I know that this sort of loss is one that I hear people sort of speculating about most, sort of fearing, especially young couples who have got children. The horror of going through losing their partner in life is something that sort of, you hear about it happening to other people and it just sort of sits there. What if it happens to me? So when you're in that place, it sounds like you're sort of saying if you can somehow just embrace the fact that we're out of control and that this chaotic stuff happens. But I guess some people are like, I don't want to relax into that. I don't want my partner to die. What do you say to people that are sort of maybe struggling with that idea?
Well, one thing is, I think one thing I have learned is every single individual situation is different. So it's probably not for me to sort of opine on other people's circumstances. But I think, as I said, relaxing into this lack of control. I think you said in that blog I mentioned, Disappointed with Life, you're trying to learn to be a person that can accept your situation and enjoy it for what it is, but you haven't quite managed that yet.
Yeah.
So I'll play that back to you. That's 3 years ago. How's that work in progress going?
I'm still not there.
Quite, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think but like you said, it's a good thing to have and to aim for. So maybe that's what people need to consider, aiming for it. I really want to relax into this. I want to, and I have really enjoyed listening to guests talk about similar things to what you say, like grief not being a bad thing. Like grief is part of life. And I think we have it as we go through life and maybe if we're unlucky, grief hits us. And it's like, no. Like grief is there. It's coming. You don't know how or when or what it will look like, but it will be there. But it's also a natural thing. It's a natural thing to go through. And we don't really see it like that over here. I think we hide it away a lot. So I think a lot of people do really fear it. But then to live in fear of something that might never happen damages the today, doesn't it? So I can understand the embracing the chaos would help that.
I'm quite an advocate of talking about death. That's the only thing, and I said that's certain apart from paying taxes. And you know, that doesn't always go down well. It seems like quite morbid and morose, whatever. Maybe that matches my personality. But because when you truly get it, the only response is to make the most of now. When you realise that it's definitely the end, it's certain, and it's relatively close. It's less than 30,000 days away, unless you're, what was her name? Ethel Caterham in Surrey, who's 116. So when you truly get that, when you truly understand, but I think you're right, Claire, in our Western societies, we've sort of tried to diminish our mortality. But I think it's very, very powerful. And it really relates to my work. So this whole thinking about past and present and future and the uncertainty, exactly, that really comes to my work. Maybe I'll say a little bit about that and maybe that'll give another perspective on it. So, you know, I said Heather and I worked at the Pru in Reading in pensions. So pensions it's about like having money later in life, maybe when you're not working, right? That is a classic, if not the classic conundrum of this past, present and future thinking, you know, and often worry. So if I and my employer, if I'm working, we put some money aside today, it'll be there in the future. That's good. But that means I haven't got the money to spend today. And will I live that long anyway? Heather didn't. And if I do survive, how much do I need? How much should I forego today in my spending so that I've got enough when I'm 70, 80, 90? So these are intractable questions and they can really, really mess with your head. And consequently, the vast majority of people are totally in the dark in this country, not just in this country, but in the developed world. And they're just blindly hoping for the best. But despite those uncertainties, you do need some sort of plan. So with pensions, most people don't know what they've got, let alone what they're going to need in the future. So what the government's been doing, it's been working with my industry really hard for several years to help people with this problem. And the idea, which I think is incredible, is the ability to see all your different pensions from your different jobs and your state pension together really simply on your phone. And it's called a pensions dashboard. And everybody I mention this idea to, now, if they're in their 40s or 50s, but young people too, they say, I need that. And many other countries have already developed this service. It's going to be a seriously cool sort of societal level development. And spookily, the first media report on this topic was in the Financial Times on the day of Heather's funeral in June 2014. I said it's been coming a long time. It's because it's such a vast project. So from that day until now, ever since I've been doing a blog all about it on the development of pensions dashboards, and I've been privileged to be involved in various different capacities, both paid and voluntary in the initiative. And my motivation to help in this and help contribute, you know, try and solve this big societal issue for millions of working age people is what's happened in my life. I'm really, really sad that Heather's not here. You know, it's painful, but like so many of your guests, I think you were saying, Claire, you know, you want to do something with that pain, something with purpose that you feel is important, which for me, I just happen to have found this thing, you know, that's been around since she's died. And there's a little play on words that I like about keeping this pain alive, even though it's painful. It's no surprise to me that the word passion has got pain running right through it.
I think this is something that some people will be thinking. And it's one of those things that someone might say to you at some point, they might not. And it's not a very nice thing to say. But I feel like I want to ask it. So because you've got this amazing way of looking at grief and you've reflected back and you've really thought about it and you've seen what you were missing when Heather died and you've raised these amazing children and, you know, you've done all this stuff. And because it's so many sort of years later and you're looking back, there's a temptation to think that this was easy for you and that you just found grieving easy in some way, or that, you know, somehow you had a strength about you that could do it easier than the average person because you've just got this amazing way of sort of looking at it. Do you need to dispel that myth, or are you somebody who just found it like an easy process?
It's not easy. I cry all the time. I'm sad all the time. But grief isn't sad because it reminds you to make the most of today. But I miss her all the time.
Yeah, I think that's important for people to know, because I know that from having, you know, had conversations with you and things, but sometimes it's easy to think that, oh, some people just get through this better than others. It's like, no, that's not how it works. It's not easy for anybody.
I think that maybe this is his pain and passion point. I think they've got the same sort of origins. Maybe you can feel strongly about something because of the situation. Now, I thought you might, I don't know where the question was going, Club. I thought you might go on to say, it sounds like you're glad she died.
Oh, God, crumbs.
No, well, no, I've heard, I don't know, have you heard, there's another podcast, All There Is. Anderson Cooper does it, a CNN reporter, and he's had guests on there who said, you almost get to see grief as a benefit. And I think some of your guests have almost said they're glad it's happened. Would they go back to the person hadn't died or they hadn't lost their arm or whatever their loss was, And I think some of them have almost taken that step and said, no, I wouldn't. I'm a better person because this has happened.
Yeah.
And that's quite a tricky step, because absolutely I'd love Heather to be seeing her grown 20-something children, and that's the thing that hurts, that she is not seeing her 3 growing up into caring and competent young adults. And that is the thing that hurts. She's not seeing the products of her labors, if you like. She really adored those kids. So taking that step to say I'm glad it's happened is a step too far, but I think it's made me better. I think it has. That's quite a paradox to say that, to even say that, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, along those lines of going back, a neighbour in Wokingham has developed a time machine. Knocks on the door, Richard, come and have a go in my time machine. So 3 questions that follow. Do you accept the invite? If you do, what point do you go back to? And then the third part, for what reason?
Wow. So a lot what's in my head right now. Do you remember I said we got together in 95? It's 30 years ago now. So we were like 27, 28. And Catherine, my oldest now, is 20. Well, she's turning 27 soon. She's met someone and they're getting together. So a lot in my head has been how special that time is, when you meet someone and you get to know them better. And I think when you know, do you know what I mean? Well, that was a situation for us anyway. So yes, basically question 1, I'm definitely going back somewhere. Let me explore where. So when there's something really special about getting together, but also that's all pre-children and all the family life and the chaotic life. So I don't know. There was also quite a lot of humor in her treatments as well. So it's quite hard to say, because as soon as we had kids, she had cancer. Do you know, Adam was 1. Do you know what I mean? So it's sort of, there haven't been that many phases in our life. There's been sort of getting together. That was quite rapid. In fact, the kids teased me saying, "Oh, you were a fast mover." We got married. We got married within sort of 18 months of getting together, sort of thing. Then we bought a house and had children pretty much straight away. Then she had cancer straight away. Not exactly, but So in my head, I suppose those are the phases. There's that wonderful time in the 90s of being newly in love and thinking, "Oh, this could go somewhere," and then the fun of having children. And just like completely making it up as you go along, like not having a clue. But as I said, it's okay because you're a team. And then the fun of, or the dark humor of all the cancer. Like we had a little joke, like a little thing would be regular 3-monthly appointments to go and like have checkups. And the waiting room is filled with septuagenarians, octogenarians, nonagenarians, and then like Heather, who's in her 30s or 40s, something. And we always found out that if there's bad news, if the latest CT scan's not good news, they like to take their time with you, so they put you in at the end of the appointments list. So we joke, we'd sort of say, "Oh, we're still here." It was, they asked you to come at 9, but we're still here at 12 o'clock, and we're going to be asked in late. So we try and make up how bad the news would be. But it's finding little stories like that are funny. Can I don't know? Can I have all 3? Can I have newly together, then brand new kids, and then the privilege of seeing someone cope with and continue to be a fabulous mum with cancer? All 3 of those were inspiring times.
Why not? Once you're in the machine, you can do what you want, I reckon.
Yeah. The neighbour's in a different time, waiting for it back.
Is there anything that you would have liked to have told yourself when you were early in those days of grief? Is there anything about grief you wish you'd known a little bit earlier on?
Yeah, that's a tough one, because you're sort of finding your feet. I think grief doesn't start at the moment of a loss, because I think, if people have a terminal diagnosis, you're into something there. And then whether you really believe it or understand it in your head is a thing as well. I think all this cherishing the moment stuff I've been blathering on about now, I think I probably wasn't very much like that when Heather was in her final years. And I wish I'd perhaps been a bit more like that. Let me just tell a story as well about, we were so lucky. She went into a Sue Ryder hospice for a couple of weeks to be stabilized because she had hypercalcemia, where you have too much calcium in the blood and you get very, very confused. That was funny. She'd like come out with all these very, very weird things. Like she was looking at a picture of the wall and she said, oh, there's all the monarchs. There's Henry VIII on Britain's Got Talent, and it's some weird stuff. And she was in Adelaide ward in Reading, and she was so upset that friends were coming to visit and having to pay the airfare to come to Australia. She was, and you're laughing and crying at the same time because it's so sad that she's so confused because of the calcium in the blood, but it's funny as well. Anyway, then she came home and, as I said, had the hospital bed in downstairs lounge for the last 3 weeks. And I cherished those 3 weeks. So 1st to the 24th of June, 2014, she had so many friends. She was exactly not what I was. I'm quite sort of insular. She was so gregarious, as her headmaster said 40 years ago. So many friends would come and visit, and she's, deteriorating, and it's clearly nearly the end now. And they're all coming, and they know they're saying goodbye. So raw, days and days of rawness, but it's a really positive rawness because all the niff, naff and trivia doesn't matter when people know. And I don't think she was too aware. She was quite drowsy and a lot of morphine, but the friends and family visiting did. So they'd come in and see her, and then we walk out to the kitchen and we'd have a hug in tears, and then they'd go, and then an hour later another, and I'd repeat this sort of 8 or 9 times a day. Incredibly raw, but it's almost like the basic life. It's like life in the raw, and I almost want to. It's a bit of a drug. So that's maybe when I go back to. Obviously, I wouldn't want her to die at the end of it. So savoring the times, I think, would be something I'd say. But you're in it at the same time, so there's a whole drug regimen, and I was in charge of the tablets, and the alarm would go off on the phone to say, now you've got to have your next baclofen or whatever the drugs were. So, I think probably I didn't just spend enough time just being with her, sitting, because she had all these friends who wanted to come and say goodbye, which is fine. Really, really lovely. After she died, I had about 300 people wanted to come to the funeral. I said, how am I going to do this? But we had Bearwood College just through the woods from us, which is called Redham House now. It's an independent school. They had a big marquee up for their speech day. So we had the funeral at the crematorium on the Friday. And then the next day we had a sort of like a sort of coffee morning. I've had about 300 people there, and they put on a fabulous buffet, and we had loads of music and stuff like that. So that no one wore black for that, so that was a really big celebratory thing. So that's a special time to remember as well.
One of the things I wanted to ask was, I know you mentioned it earlier about hope, but what has hope looked like on this journey for you?
Well, I think I've put a lot of my thinking into this professional stuff, this work stuff I've been doing around this, people being able to see what they've got and feeling a bit less anxious about the future, and doing this continental tour, as I said, of countries who've had these services. About half the population use these dashboards at least 2 or 3, 4 times a year, and just the level of comfort about what's there. And if there's not enough there, you can do something about it. So for me, and particularly because of this timing with, the first media report being on a funeral day, that's been a bit, and I've put a lot of energy into that because I feel I can contribute in some way to making things a bit better in the future. I don't know. I mean, if you zoom out, there's bigger worries on the planet, aren't there? There's really, really a lot of big worries. And I think, I feel bad again, but having Gen Z children, what is the world if they do get to retirement age in 2066 or 2070? What is the world going to look like then? We don't know. We've reached 1.5 degrees. It's a real worry. But this is part of the excitement as well about this tool, this service, because what we found in testing is when people see their 3 pensions, they say, well, which one's best, where they're invested. And I don't know if you saw the campaign Make My Money Matter that Richard Curtis, the screenwriter, has founded. They've said that putting your money invested in sustainable investments is 23 times the impact of giving up flying and going vegan. So what we do with our money is really, really important for the planet. So that's another reason why I'm quite keen for people to see what they've got, so they can then understand how much damage it's doing to the planet, or hopefully do something about that. I'm quite a big picture sort of guy, and I think for me, something that's going to have some significant impact for decades to come for lots of people has been something. But I think it's only because she's gone. I don't know. I'm not sure. Maybe I had the proclivity to be this sort of person anyway, but the power of actually trying to do something in the now has come about because of the experience.
Well, to come back to the commitment, compassion, comedy, you said that's not me. I disagree. I think from the little that we know of you, I disagree. I think that is you. I think you are channeling that absolutely brilliantly well. So it's been an absolute joy to talk to you, and thank you for sharing so much. You know, clearly you're so eloquent in how you share so many years of reflections and wonderings and thinkings. So thank you for that. If you could boil it down into something to pass on to somebody else, something that you've grown, you've nurtured, that's healthy, that you could share with somebody else. That's why we asked this last question, so to you, what's your Herman?
Well, my Herman is that loss is everywhere because life happens to everyone, right? But if I'm right on that, then the wonderful upside of that is that hope is everywhere too. If people can sit comfortably with their situation in the moment, day to day, with whatever's happened to them in life or hasn't happened. Because for me, at least, keeping that positive grief alive, we're continually reminded of life's uncertainty, and it's that which allows the door to hope to remain open forever.
Embracing uncertainty isn't easy for everyone, but Richard has shown us the kind of freedom that can come from living with that mindset. There's a Chinese proverb that says, "When the winds of change blow, some people build walls and others build windmills." Like Richard was talking about, we have a choice about what we do, how we respond, what we build. I feel like Richard is a good example of a windmill building person. And we think it's inspiring to hear people like that share where grief has taken them and what they've learnt along the way. We hope you've had the same experience through this episode and the many others that we've put out. What we've learnt today is that maybe grief itself doesn't have to be a sad thing. Yes, it brings sadness. But as you regular listeners will also know by now, that's certainly not all it brings.
If you'd like to find out more about Richard, check out the show notes for links to the blog he wrote for the Sue Ryder charity about telling his children that their mum was dying, more about the pensions dashboard that he talked about, and the Straight Line charity walk he did across the UK.
And for everything else about us, past episodes, resources, blog posts and more, you can visit thesilentwhy.com or find us on social media at thesilentwhypod.
And don't forget, Claire's little hands make wonderful Herman grief companions. They're thoughtful, comforting gifts for people going through hard times.
Yes, Hermans are a great alternative to the usual flowers, candles or casseroles that often come with grief or struggle. Whether someone's grieving, facing illness, adjusting to retirement, or just feeling a bit lost and lonely, Herman is a gentle, meaningful way to say, "I see you." He comes with a flyer that explains who he is and why you're sending him, and you can see a photo of that on the website, and I can even handwrite a personal note to include as well. When you send or buy a Herman, not only does someone sad get the perfect gift to make them smile, and you feel good about giving them something unique, but also the money goes straight into supporting the podcast and helping us keep that going. And you can buy your Herman or find out any more details at thehermancompany.com.
We'll leave you with a quote that beautifully captures the spirit of Richard's story and the hope that can grow in the midst of uncertainty from biographer and novelist Margaret Drabble.
When nothing is sure, everything is possible.